Welcome to this video tutorial. I am going to show you today how to make a web crawler. There's various ways to get data from the web. You could use an API. You could use this nifty get data from the web here in Excel. But today I'm going to show you a third way, which is pulling data directly from the DOM. So let me show you a brief example of what we're doing. So if you go to Yahoo, the #1 source for unbiased news, we're going to look at something called the DOM. So if you hit Control-Shift-J and go over here to Elements, you'll see all these HTML stuff. Like here's a div, and it shows you that div up here. So if you right-click on Mitten Crab, I don't know what a Mitten Crab is. We're not going to find out. But if you click on Mitten Crab and you hit Inspect, it takes you to the HTML element that corresponds. So you're like, oh, cool, it's a span, and its class name is mstart2px stuff. Interesting class name. And so here you could see, oh, that's where Mitten Crab sits. You see this text right here? Boom. That is actually, that's the span that corresponds to this. And they actually wrote in Mitten Crab, and that's why Mitten Crab appears on your screen. So if you wanted to, and let's say Yahoo doesn't have an API or doesn't make the information you want available, you could come here with a web crawler and say, I want to know, let's say you want to keep track of the top 10 trending items on Yahoo every 1 minute. You just want to keep track of that and store it in a database. You could use a web crawler to come to Yahoo and pick this up from the DOM. And again, the DOM is the document object model, I think, and it is everything that appears on your screen when you're on a web page. So this is all DOM material. So the example we're going to use is IMDB, very well known. Now, first and foremost, does IMDB have an API? Basic Google search, they do not. They have unofficial APIs, which we don't know if they're being maintained well or have the correct information. So instead of using an unofficial API, we're going to actually just go to the source and crawl IMDB. So what we'll do is we're going to type in the name of a movie here. So I saw this movie recently. It was amazing. Separation. It's an Iranian film. Highly recommended if you're okay with reading English text during Iranian film, but phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And what we're going to do is come to this page and we're going to see a lot of different elements. Remember, we have this DOM. So there's a lot of different elements being showed us. So let's say you had a list of 500 movies, and every day you were watching more movies and you wanted to keep track of the information about that movie, and you used IMDb as a source. So let's say, you wanted to keep track of the rating and how long it was and what genre it was, when it was released, the title, the rating it got on IMDb, etc. There's a lot of different information you could come crawl. So we're going to create the project I'm going to show you today is we're going to grab all of this information in an automated fashion using a web crawler. All right, now it brings us to the fun part where we're going to start coding. I've set up a little spreadsheet for us to get started. We're going to try and pull in the title and the year to keep this brief. We could pull in a lot more if we wanted to, but we'll start there. And then I've inserted this flag because sometimes we don't want it refreshing. Movies don't really change, their scores don't change, so we're telling the program if we want it to refresh. And then I've inserted 3 URLs for movies I like that I found. So these are 3 IMDb URLs where I would just go to the movie I like, grab the URL, and now we're going to talk about how to get this year. How to get this year and how to get this score from IMDb with web crawling. So first thing we're going to do now that we have our spreadsheet set up is we're going to want to go to the Visual Basic Editor. We're going to want to insert a module here. Boom, module. We're going to call the module something, whatever you want to call. I'm going to call mine web crawler. Before we start coding, we need to enable a couple references because we're going to use certain objects and variables that are not part of the vanilla Visual Basic framework or setup. So we're going to enable 2. One is called Microsoft Internet Control. So I've already enabled that. So I'll enable that. You have to find it below. It takes a while. So pause the video and find that one. And then also find Microsoft HTML Object Library. So we're going to need both of those. So once you have those in, then we can start with a couple variables that I'm going to explain briefly. So first we're going to say dim IE, which stands for Internet Explorer, as new shdoc v w. Now that auto-populates, so I know that that this guy's real, and then because it auto-populates, when I hit dot, it's going to show me all of its properties, and I want Internet Explorer. So this is what's going to allow us to mess with and manipulate Internet Explorer. Then I want to create an HTML doc as mshtml dot HTML document. So this is what's going to allow us to access the DOM. So we have an object to access Internet Explorer and an object to access the DOM. Now we're going to also create two more HTML classes as mshtml.ihtml element collection. So this guy is a collection. It's a container. It holds stuff. And we're going to put stuff in this container. And what are we going to put into it? Well, we're going to put into it the stuff we need. So we're going to create like an individual element that we can use to manipulate and put stuff into our container as mshtml dot ihtml element. Okay. So we've explained what these are. We've enabled the references. So we are ready to go. The next step is we're going to want to create a collection, or it's a collection. It's going to be a type of container where we're going to hold all our URLs, whether we have 3 or 500. So we're going to say dim URL holder as new collection, and that's where we're going to place all of our URLs so that we can loop through them and mess with them. And now, because we've done that, we are going to need to loop through those. So I'm going to say dim last row. We need to know how deep our URLs go. Dim last row as integer, and then last row is equal to range, and we need it. It's always going to be column D, so it's going to be d1.end xl down dot row. And now this last row integer, last row variable will hold the last row, which in this case would be row 4. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can loop through this. So that would mean for is equal to, it's always going to be on row 2 because row 1 is going to hold our titles and stuff. So we're going to start on row 2, and then we're going to go to the last row, and then we're going to pick up if cells. We know that column C holds our go or no go. So if column C, which is row I3, column 3, is equal to X, then, hey, it's a go. We're ready to go. Let's use this URL. Then put it in the container, URL holder.add and cells I4, and column 4 being our URL. Boom. So that says, hey, if it's got an X, put it in our nifty little holder of URLs. So now we have all the URLs we need to roll. Now we're going to loop through all of these URLs and start manipulating the DOM as we talked about. So in order to do that, we need to create an object that we can use to loop through this collection or container. So that would be dim URL item as variant. So now we have something that we can loop through it. And then we're going to say for each URL item in URL holder, next URL item. So now whether there's 5 or 5,000 URLs, we can loop through each of them and manipulate them and access them. Now we need to actually access the URLs that we've put into this container now that we're looping through them. So we need to actually go to the URL page. So we're going to say ie.navigate, which will navigate us to the first URL item. And when the script tells the browser to load that URL, we need to tell the script to say, hold on script, stop running until the page loads. So that would mean we need to tell it do while ie.ready, oops, that's not a comment, ready state does not equal complete loop. And this is saying, wait until the page loads, please. So now we've told our script, don't keep going until the page is loaded. Now that the page is loaded, let's access the DOM. So we need to say set HTML doc, which is the guy we created up here, is equal to IE document, and this will allow us to access the DOM and ask it for specific items. And right now what we want is we want to get to the year. So let's come back here and let's right click on the year, which is the element we want. We're going to click inspect. And when we do that, we see that this is the element, this href, which is a link that holds our year. And by the way, it's sitting in a span, and a span is a type of HTML container, and the span is called title year. So what we can do is we can actually say set HTML classes, which is an object we created up here to hold all of our HTML elements in a container. So we're going to say, hey, for that container, we want all of the spans in it. So we say HTML doc. Hey, we're touching the DOM again. Get elements by tag name, and we want to put in that span. So then this would say put all of the spans into our container. So now this container would hold every single span on the DOM, from the URL where we're at. And now we need to loop through this container. We need to get to the one we want. So we're going to say for each HTML class in HTML classes, and remember, HTML class is just an element of classes, or it's an object we're going to use to loop through classes. Oh, and we need to correct that. That should be IHTML element. There we go. Okay, so for every HTML element in the collection, next HTML class, we're going to need to do something. So if HTML class dot ID is equal to, well, what do we need it to be equal to? Title year. And we know it's containing all the spans. So if the ID is equal to title year, then let's put that, whatever that element is, whatever is sitting in that item, let's put it here, which would be the year. So that would be cells. We know it's row 2. And we actually will need, since we're for eaching, we need to create our own iterator. So we're going to say dim iteration as integer. And let's put that outside the for loop. And iteration is equal to 2 because we know it's always going to start at the row. And now that we're iterating, let's say iteration is the row, and the column is always going to be 2 for the year. Cells row 2, column 2 is equal to HTML class dot inner text. Okay, so the inner text is what is a property of the HTML class, which is an HTML element. So inner text is going to contain this guy. It's going to contain the title year, and the title year will be 2010. Hey, look at that. That's the inner text. Okay, so let's test our code so far. Let's see if this is working. Next, we got to end our if statement and if. Okay, let's test to see if this is working. And by the way, we want to exit the loop once we find what we need. Okay, so we know it's going to put all of our URLs in a collection, so that's cool. And then it's going to, well, let's just iterate all the way there. Okay, and then it's going to iterate through each of these URLs. So let's see what happens. So it's going to navigate to that URL. It's going to make sure the page is loaded. The page is now loaded. And then it's going to let us manipulate or access the DOM. And it's going to start looping through each of these elements within. There's going to be a lot of spans sitting in classes, and we're going to loop through each of them. And so as you see, that first span wasn't it. And so I'm going to put a marker here that says, hey, let's just keep looping till we find what we need. And we found it. So cells, we're going to place this inner text in cells 2, which right now iteration is equal to 2. So let's see what happens. Did it go where we thought? 1979. Is that, well, it's not 2010, but I believe this URL, Kramer versus Kramer, is made in 1979. So we have successfully captured the year. So then it should break the 4. And we're going to put one more thing here because we want the title. So we're going to put the title here and continue from there. Because we're lazy, we're just going to take everything we did with year, and we're going to try and replicate it. So let's place that there, and then let's go back to the HTML, and let's find out where we're going to get, because we want to get, we want to get title. Okay, so let's inspect the element. Okay, so it looks like title is sitting in an H1 class, not a span class. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about H1 is we know there's only one header, right? You see one header here. And so we don't really have to really worry about there being a ton of H1s because every web page generally only has one H1 kind of by definition. So we can feel good about that. So I'm actually going to get rid of the if because there's no class. We don't need to worry about the if. And let's see what else. So then it's got this and in there. So let's see what happens if we do this. If we just take this back and do this, I'm going to clear this out. Let's just see what happens. We need to change this to the column 3 because that's, no, column 1 because that's where the title is sitting. So if we just do if we use the code like this, and we know the first header is the header because it's the only header, and then we put the inner text there. Okay, so this is what it put there, Kramer versus Kramer 1979. Now, that's not super helpful because we don't want the year on there, and we don't know what else, for other URLs it might attach something else. And this is one way we could do this, but let's change this to InnerHTML. So instead of just grabbing the inner text, we're grabbing a different property called InnerHTML, and let's see what it puts there. Okay, so after looking through multiple web pages, what I realized is every time it puts the title, it'll put an ampersand and then a bunch of nonsense. So what we can, or things we don't need at least. So what we can do is we can just kind of access that for free if we create an array. So let's just create, this is a titles as string, and then dim title array as string. So what we're going to do is we're going to place this information into an array and then get it out of the array in a format that makes sense to us. So we're going to say title is equal to HTML class.innerHTML, and that's what we kind of did here, except now we're putting it in a variable called titles. And then once it's in there, we're going to take the title array, and we're going to use a function that's built into most programming languages, at least JavaScript and VBA, which is split, which takes a string and it's going to break it down by a specific character we pass into the function, in this case, an ampersand. So when we split the ampersand by ampersand, what happens is if we do this, so we say titles is equal, so now it's got this big text string, and then we say title array is equal there. And then if we say cells iteration 1 is equal to title array, and then we access the first value of the array, and I'll show you why. If we check what the first value of the array is, title array, Kramer versus Kramer, because the next value of the array would have all this crap in it because the first ampersand, after the first ampersand, it put the rest. So we're going to put this 0, we're going to put this position of the array into the cell we were talking about. So now if we do this, it says Kramer versus Kramer did exactly what it wanted us to. And now we have a programmatic way of ensuring always, as long as there's an ampersand, which after reviewing multiple URLs, it seems like it does, it will always get the title we want there. And then lastly, I'm going to add a little, just to make sure we keep iterating correctly, iteration equals iteration plus 1. So now we have, if I have it correctly, we have the year and the title coming into our spreadsheet based on the URL. Let's clean this up a bit. All right, so now comes the moment of truth where we're actually going to test out our sub here and see if it works. So let's just stop it real quick. Let's clear out Kramer versus Kramer. We've got our 3 URLs. So let's come back and let's run it and see what happens. So if I just minimize in a way that makes sense, and then I just run this, let's see what happens. Yay! So a couple things. Number one, that took a while, so I'm sure there's a way more efficient way of doing this. Number two, we could work on some formatting here, which we won't do in this video. And lastly, we should probably build in some error handling, which we haven't done either. Is there always a URL placed here? Or maybe that ampersand method could cause problems if there's a title with an ampersand in it. So that's some error handling we might want to build in, which we did not, but would be nice to have. But overall, that should give you a really good idea of how to do a basic web scrape, grab information from the DOM, and bring it into a spreadsheet in a programmatic way where you don't have to go in and grab all that data yourself. Now, lastly, I keep my own version of this, a little more fleshed out, which I'll show you briefly. And this has more fields, and it goes down to 398, and I have my renew tag here, and I have the URL, and I have a button, so we could build this out even further. And by the way, for all these movies I've seen, I don't want to have to come in here and redo this. And every time I watch a movie, I just add it to the bottom and refresh this, tagging the one I want, the one I want to renew. And lastly, IMDb scores could change, and I don't want to have to manually update that. And so now I can run an update on the movies I've seen that I like. And that is Web Crawling 101. Thank you for watching, and let me know if you have any questions.